We're learning the fifth Sicha of Parshas Eikev in Chelek Yotes on page 121. This shir is being learned Lili Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. Zusammen mit dem Zivui auf Mitzvahs Mezuzah be Parshasena. Along with the Mitzvah of Mezuzah, which is written in this week's Parsha, Uchesavtam al Mezuzah is Beisecha uvisharecha, to write the Mezuzah and to place it on your doorpost. Zoktan di Teire gleich nach dem. The Torah immediately follows and says, what the reward for this mitzvah is. That by fulfilling this mitzvah, you will increase your life and the life of your children. This is also quoted in Shulchan Aruch. One that's careful with the mitzvah of Mezuzah, he and his children will live a long life. In the Minyan Eidah Saschar, the fact that the Torah here notifies us what the schar of this mitzvah is, gleich zechois mitzvahs Mezuzah mit noch gewisse mitzvahs was the Torah gibt zu wissen befehlish der schar. It's compared to other mitzvahs where the Torah clearly tells us what the schar is. Vi kibbud aveim v'chayetze b'zeh. One of those mitzvahs is kibbud aveim, where the Torah also tells us what the reward is, and other mitzvahs as well. However, we find over here regarding Mezuzah and Mitzvahs Mezuzah an Inyan Noisav was me gefunden it by andere Mitzvahs. There's an additional detail, a bigger chiddush that we find regarding the Mitzvah of Mezuzah even more than other Mitzvahs. Chazal sagen, the Gemara tells us, und the Torah bringt es herab, the Torah quotes this as well. As durch dem, was mit Kevea a Mezuzah, was me is Kevea a Mezuzah, if in Pesach Habayis, that through the fact that one places a mezuzah on the doorpost of your house, heat der Eibishter den Bayis. This brings protection. Hashem guards your home. And the Torah actually gives the following analogy. Melech basav adam, when it comes to a king of flesh and blood, mibafnim, so the king is on the inside in the palace. V'avadav shomer moisa mibachutz, and his servants are guarding him from the outside. V'atem, however, when it comes to you, to the Yidden, you sheinin al mitaschem, you sleep peacefully in your bed, and the Eibishter is guarding you from the outside. And this is what the mezuzah on the door accomplishes. That's what it says in the Torah. So this protection that one gets through the mitzvah of mezuzah is nit an inyan von schar mitzvah. This is not as a reward for fulfilling a mitzvah. Nor this is, wie the Bach is masber. Rather, this is, as the Bach explains, this is a benefit and a gain that you get from the very mitzvah itself. That this is the nature of the very mitzvah itself, that it provides protection. In addition to the reward that the Torah says that you live long life. Und damit is the Bach masber, das was the Torah schreibt. So with this, the Bach explains why, when the Torah brings this concept that Hashem guards us with the mezuzah, so he says, as the shmira durch the mezuzah is gedoyla mizeh. It's greater. It's even greater than the point that he mentioned before, which is gereser from the mschar l'man yirbu v'geimer. It's greater than the reward of long life. Why is it greater? Because the fact that Hashem protects us through the mezuzah, that's a benefit that comes from the very mezuzah itself, from the very mitzvah itself. The schar is an additional thing, that you get rewarded for the mitzvah that you did. So this is a unique chiddush that we find only regarding the mitzvah of mezuzah, that the very mitzvah itself has a gain and a benefit, in this case protection. Nachmer, in addition, that inyan hashmire is nit kein zeitige anove revach from mitzvahs mezuzah. The fact that there's protection through this mitzvah of mezuzah, which is the gain that you have from the mitzvah, is not a side thing that happens to be a result of doing the mitzvah. Nor does it an ikir in mitzvahs mezuzah. This is a primary focus of what the purpose of the mitzvah is for. Ubelashon ha-taisvus, as Taisvus says, l'shimur of it. The mitzvah of mezuzah is made for this point, to have the protection on your home by placing the mezuzah on the door. Because of this special, unique advantage that the mitzvah of mezuzah has, as the gufa mitzvah is a shmira, that the definition of the very mitzvah itself is the fact that this mitzvah provides protection. and it's the purpose of the mitzvah, is da a chiluk zwischen dem Oifen Akiyim von Mitzvahs Mezuzah and the Oifen Akiyim von andere mitzvahs. There's a difference when it comes to the way a person fulfills this mitzvah, the attitude a person has when he fulfills the mitzvah of Mezuzah, and the attitude a person has when he comes to fulfill any other mitzvah. So the Rebbe explains first regarding other mitzvahs with the following introduction. B'chlal, so generally speaking, when the Torah mentions clearly what the reward for the mitzvah is the Torah eisen nitzdam zu the tzeilen wegen dem. The point here is not, the Torah is not just telling you a matter of fact that this is the reward that you could receive and will receive. Now, kipshute shal mikra, but as the simple meaning of the pasuk is, zum mechazik sein durch dem, mizare sein dem kiyama mitzvahs. The Torah is letting you know about the schar so that this will encourage you and strengthen you to go ahead and do this mitzvah. And Chazal sagen doch, we know what Chazal tell us when it comes to the motive that a person has to do a mitzvah, that le'olam yasik adam b'Torah mitzvahs afal pi shel lo lishmacholo. That a person should always be ready to do a mitzvah, even if this means doing the mitzvah with an ulterior motive. And the Rambam bringt es herab la'halach and ilchus tshuva, as the Rambam quotes this also as a halacha. On his masber, and he explains, as azay muzayin dem seder alimut. This is actually a must. This is how you begin teaching and educating children, training them into the love of Torah by giving them certain things as a reward, and that's their motive to learn. And the Rambam says as follows: Haketanim v'chulu, children, ein melamdem noisam, we cannot teach them Torah ela chulu ukedei lekabel schar, only when they know that you will reward them for their learning. Until they'll grow older and they'll be more mature, they'll have a deeper understanding, and they'll have greater wisdom. Then, megalan lahem rozeh, or actually again, going back to the child when he's still young, megalan lahem rozeh ma'at. Slowly, we reveal to them the secret to give them the understanding of how precious the Torah itself is. And we slowly accustom them to learning Torah even without any reward, without any other motive, but to learn it for the sake of the Torah itself. But this is very gradual, because a child initially can only begin getting his geschmack, his feeling and his taste for learning Torah when you give him some kind of a reward, some kind of other benefit in his learning. Und wie sich meirig in Pirush HaMishnayos, the Rambam also speaks about this at length in his Pirush HaMishnayos, where there the Rambam says, as those that do not yet comprehend the ultimate truth, to the point you get to the level of Avraham Avinu that was connected to the truth itself. The way to encourage them to learn on this matter, and we have to strengthen them with their motive that they have in different ways to give them rewards. To tam mitzvahs tzalib zeir schar. So here we see that this is not only an acceptable way of learning Torah, shalei lishma, but actually this is the way you begin educating a child or any individual that does not yet appreciate the Torah for what it is, by doing it shalei lishma and even for a specific reward. So this is true by all mitzvahs. However, at the same time, it's understood as when mizmekayim a mitzvah, if one fulfills a mitzvah just for the reward alone, fell down in shleimus akim from the mitzvah. So definitely he's lacking in the fullness of this fulfillment of the mitzvah. His involvement in the mitzvah with an ulterior motive, so he's not fully doing the mitzvah for the sake of the mitzvah itself. It's not the complete level, the highest level of doing a mitzvah. Nachmer, even more so, when a person does a mitzvah and he's doing it for the sake to fulfill his creator's mitzvah, for the sake of the mitzvah that Hashem has given him, at the same time though, he thinks to himself, well, I could have a fringe benefit as something that will benefit me from this mitzvah. For example, he gives tzedakah because this will give life to his son. If his son is not well and he wants to have a merit for the health of his son, that'll merit to have a peace in the world to come. Even though the Gemara says about this, that this individual is a tzaddik gomer, an absolute tzaddik, es ist noch nicht der schlimmste geöffnet von Kiyama mitzvah. Nevertheless, this is not the ultimate level of performing a mitzvah with purely for the sake of the Eibishter that commanded to fulfill this mitzvah. So that's when it comes to all mitzvahs. There's the mitzvah that's done shalai lishma, which is fully acceptable, but at the same time, it's still not the shleimus of the mitzvah. When it comes to the mitzvah of mezuzah and the fact that a mezuzah serves for the purpose of protecting the person, yeshleima, we can say, as vibal, das is nit betor schar. For the mitzvah, the fact that mezuzah is a protection is not some kind of a reward. Nor a teitza un a chelek von the mitzvah gufa. This is a result and actually a part of what the very mitzvah itself is. The shmira of the mitzvah is what the mitzvah is about. Is this nit kein chesaron in shleimus hakiyum mit das vert getan selib shmira. So if so, there's nothing lacking in the ultimate and full fulfillment of the mitzvah if he's doing the mitzvah with this realization or with this understanding that it's being done for the purpose of shmira. This is actually what the purpose of the very mitzvah itself is, to bring protection for a yid. Nach mehr Kanal von Teisvis, das ist Mataris HaMitzvah l'shimur Ravid. So the Rebbe divides it here into 2 points. Number one, the mitzvah does provide protection, and number two, that's actually the goal of the mitzvah. The purpose of the mitzvah is actually to give a person protection. So therefore, when a person is doing the mitzvah for this point of the protection of the mitzvah, there's nothing lacking in his mitzvah. Noch mehr, in addition, eine von die Taimim, was man darf gewei sein, die Mezuzah bepesach hasamach l'rishus harabim. One of the reasons why, when it comes to determining exactly where on the doorpost you place the mezuzah, if you have a wide doorpost, do you place it further in or further out? So the Gemara says, and the halach is that it has to be placed betefach hasamach l'rishus harabim, at that last tefach that's closest to the outside, to the street, is kedei ke'echid tinteres. Like this, every inch of his house, including till the very outside, will be fully protected. So this haste, what do we understand from this? As das was the mezuzah is a shmira, the fact that mezuzah is a protection is nit nor was mekenes haben in machshave be'eis kviyas mezuzah. This is not just something that a person can think about and be aware of and understand that this is what the mitzvah is about when you place the mezuzah on the doorpost, nor das bestimmt dem oifen kiyam mitzvah. This actually will determine how you fulfill the mitzvah. Where exactly do you place that mezuzah? Und das kommt b'maise b'payil. It's not just something in your thoughts, but this is in action, where you put the mezuzah. Wie the Torah bringt es dort arab, as the Torah himself quotes it there in the continuation of his words in the same place. So this is the unique chiddush we find regarding the mitzvah of mezuzah, that it's a mitzvah that the very mitzvah itself is about shmira, and this is something, when a person thinks about this and he does the mitzvah for this purpose, there's nothing lacking in his fulfillment of the mitzvah. However, one can ask on this, der Torah allein is dort Messiah. The Torah himself, after he brings the fact that a mezuzah is for shmira and Hashem is guarding us from the outside and we are on the inside, so after he says this, he concludes and says as follows, however, lo yehei kavana samakayma, the kavana, the point that you're thinking about when you fulfill the mitzvah should not be elo lekayim mitzvah sabayri yizbarach shetzivanu aleh. You fulfill the mitzvah only for the sake of the fact that the Eibishter commanded to do the mitzvah. Which means, seemingly, as mezol nit mechaven sein, as the mezuzah is l'shem shmira. Somebody should not think to himself, you know why I'm doing this mitzvah? I'm doing the mitzvah for the purpose of shmira. So how can we say that over here, since the whole point of the mitzvah itself is all about shmira, that there's nothing wrong if a person is thinking that he's putting up this mezuzah for shmira, if the Torah clearly says that one should not be thinking that he's doing it for the shmira, rather he's only doing it for the mitzvah that the Eibishter commanded us to do. So the point over here is, this is not a question of what we said before at all. First point is, the Torah zoktas nit beloshen shalisser. First of all, the Torah does not say that one is not allowed to be thinking about the fact that this mezuzah will provide him protection. It doesn't say Oster. It says lo yehei, shall not be, but it doesn't say that it's forbidden. And the Rabbi will get back to this point at the end of the sif. But besides that, there's also a huge distinction here. Is euch nit mistaver. It's not logical to say, as the Torah kommt da sagen, that what the Torah is coming to say is, as mit darf bechlal nit trachten beim kiyem mitzvah mezuzah, as das is ashmira. That one should not at all think about the fact that what I'm doing right now is I'm placing a mezuzah which is a protection. You cannot think about the fact that this mezuzah is a protection when you're doing this mitzvah. Doesn't make sense that this is what the Torah means. So first of all, the proof here is kanal, as we quoted before regarding the halacha. Ma dochas oifen kiyuma is dafke durch ha'pe'ula. Was weist, as in yona is shmira. If the mitzvah is done in such a manner that when you have to determine how to do the mitzvah, where to place the mezuzah, you're going to look at how you're going to get the most protection by placing it to the closest to the outside. Which means that, of course, you're paying attention to the fact that this is a shmira, and that's how you're doing the mitzvah b'payil. Is doch kol shekein, so most definitely, as memek trachten as amachshava. So most definitely, one may be aware and be doing the mitzvah with this thought that what I'm doing now is placing a mezuzah, which is a protection. So then what does the Torah mean when he says, do not do the mitzvah with this kavanah for shmira? Nor, the mitzvah is a nor shailil. When the Torah says that, what he's coming to negate is something is something further, something different. As beim Kiyum, Mitzvahs Mezuzah, when one comes to fulfill this Mitzvah of Mezuzah, darf nicht sein die Kavana. The point and the Kavana that you're focusing on, meaning that this is your only, your exclusive motive for the Mitzvah. That's what Kavana here means. Your Kavana should not be as Metutes to leave der Teyelas Hashmira was Mahat von der Mitzvah. That the only reason why I'm doing the Mitzvah is for this Shmira. Warum? Wollte sie mit keinem gewähnt, mit demselben Chelek wie Hiddur, wenn wollte bei nicht gewähnt, kennen von Shmira Klal. Because a Yid that does this mitzvah, of course, you have to do the mitzvah because Hashem commanded it, whether it is a Shmira, whether it does not provide you a Shmira, it doesn't matter. You'll do the mitzvah anyways because this is Hashem's mitzvah. Not as davzayin lekayim mitzvah sabayri is barach. So in that sense, of course, when one does the mitzvah, he's only doing the mitzvah because it's Hashem's mitzvah that he has to fulfill. Right? So in other words, this is what the Torah is negating. That if someone would come and say, my whole kavanah in the mitzvah is that I'm doing it just for the sake of the shmirah, and he would not do it if not for the shmirah, so that, the Torah says, one should not do it with such a kind of kavanah. However, on the other hand, though, megben be'eis maise haben in Sinnen, you may have in your mind and think about the fact as the mitzvah besteht in them, that what is this mitzvah? The mitzvah consists of the fact was der Eibishter hat geheißen a Yidden machen a Shmira of sein bias. The mitzvah itself consists of the Shmira. What is the mitzvah all about? The fact that Hashem says, place a mezuzah, which is a Shmira on your house. In other words, create a protection for your home. That is what the very content of the mitzvah itself is. The mitzvah has two parts. It has the physical action of placing the mezuzah on the doorpost, but then there's also what the mitzvah is. The mitzvah is the shmirah that's created through this mezuzah that you place there. So obviously, if that's part of the mitzvah, so of course the person can be thinking, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing the mitzvah, which is creating that shmirah. So that, the Torah does not negate at all. There's a huge distinction there. Now the Rebbe goes back to the point that he said before, that the Torah is negating that one should not do the mitzvah with the kavanah, that I'm only doing it because it's a protection, but otherwise I would not do it. And even on that, if the Torah would not say that it's Oster. When I feel it done, when we tut the mitzvah blois to leave them to yelas hashmira, even if someone is doing the mitzvah just for the purpose, because he wants the benefit of the protection, is as kiyama mitzvah. So he's doing a mitzvah. Narvas then, but shalai lishma, like any time a person does a mitzvah shalai lishma, when he's not motivated to do a mitzvah and his only motive is because he wants to have some kind of a gain, some kind of a schar from the mitzvah. So here as well, when one does the mitzvah only for the purpose, because of the protection, it's no worse than any other case of doing a mitzvah shalai lishma. Was euch demalt by their matzav bedas v'chachme v'chulus, and even then, and regarding those people or a child that's in a situation where we can't expect them to understand better and more, is kana b'loshna Rambam, as the Rambam clearly says regarding doing mitzvahs shalei lishma, mizarze moisem azeh mechaskim kavanasam. We strengthen them and we encourage them to go ahead and do the mitzvah shalei lishma. So this explains why the Torah does not say Oster. He just says lo yehei. That's not the ultimate fulfillment of a mitzvah, doing it just for the purpose of the shmirah. But now going back to the main point here of this sif, in a case where a person does the mitzvah because it's the Eibishter's mitzvah, and the motive is not just to get the schar, but he understands and is thinking about the fact that what does the mitzvah itself consist of? The fact that it creates a shmirah, that's totally fine. Not only that's totally fine, that's actually what the mitzvah is. It creates a shmirah. However, seemingly, we can ask on all of this a question from a different angle. The Rambam paskint und the Torah bringt es herab. The Rambam says, and the Torah quotes this as well in a different place, that Eilu shekaisvim b'fnim shemis hamalachim. Those individuals that write inside of Mezuzah names of malachim, hareheim b'chlal mishen lem chelek leilam haba. They are part of those people that it says that they have no portion of the world to come. She'elu atipshim, these fools, le'dailem shebitlu ha-mitzvah. Not only did they nullify this mitzvah here by doing so, they took a great mitzvah like this, and then turn it into some kind of an amulet that they use for their own personal benefit. That's what the Rambam tells us about the Mezuzah. Das heißt, so doesn't this mean as follows? In other words, as das was the Mezuzah wird betracht, via kameya shalanos atzman. If somebody considers a Mezuzah to be like an amulet that he uses for his own benefit, tzali b'shmira, he's using the Mezuzah for protection. Is this nit blois anin for shalei lishma? It's not just like any other mitzvah that a person does with an ulterior motive, which is fully acceptable. Here the Rambam says there's something additionally wrong here. Utilizing a mezuzah for a shmireh is a step further than just shalei lishma. This is actually foolish. He's including those people that have no portion in the world to come. So if so, this questions everything we said before, that doing a mitzvah of mezuzah for the shmireh is fully acceptable. And even if you're doing the mitzvah exclusively for that purpose and you have no other motive, the worst it can be, or it's fine when you do a mitzvah shalei lishma. But here we see that by a mezuzah, utilizing a mezuzah in this way for your own anah is something which is total foolishness, and even more than that. Das was the Rambam sagt as batla ha-mitzvah. The fact that the Rambam says that he nullified the mitzvah, that's not our question here. The mitzvah's mezuzah, he's puzzle. The fact that he nullified the mitzvah and this mezuzah here is puzzle is neshayach b'nidin didan. That's not related to our conversation here that we're discussing regarding the mitzvah of mezuzah. What's the motive of the mitzvah? What should he be thinking about? While the psol is nitzalibdem, was also mitzvah gedele kilu kameicholo. The mezuzah does not become puzzle just because the person's attitude that he considers the mezuzah to be like an amulet. Nor tzalibdem was mat meisav given shemis hamalachim v'cholu in pnim ha-mezuzah. Rather, because he added inside of the mezuzah different things that are not part of the parshas of the mezuzah. On the Rambam paskint in the friedige halacha, and the Rambam clearly says in the halacha before this, Haisiv mibifnim afila ois achas harezeh psula. You add inside the mezuzah even one extra letter, the whole mezuzah is puzzle. So that's not the issue here. Und das was the Rambam is mamshich. When the Rambam here continues and says she'asu mitzvah gedoyle v'chulu, that he took such a great mitzvah and turned it into an amulet. Nit king tam, this is not the reason why it's not a mitzvah, nor a haisafayv bitlum ha-mitzvah. This is an additional point besides the fact that by the very fact that you add names of malachim, you nullify the mitzvah because there's an extra letter inside of the mezuzah. So there's an additional point. And the Rambam wants to explain that it's not only that you nullified a mitzvah and the mezuzah is possible, but besides that, you're also a fool and you have no chelek leilam haba. So there's two different points that the Rambam is saying here. The question that we're asking, though, is from this that the Rambam says that if someone treats a mezuzah like something which is hanoas atzmam, the benefit of the mitzvah, the shmirah of the mitzvah, then he's a fool. So then how can we say that doing the mitzvah with this machshava, that it's for shmirah, is a positive thing and it's actually part of the mitzvah itself? Aber, however, in Emerson, Kamenet lernen in der halacha from Rambam, we cannot understand the words of the Rambam as der Isser besteht nor in dem was hakavana shalei lishma, that there's an Isser to do the mitzvah of mezuzah when it's done with an ulterior motive to nutzin the mezuzah al tzashmira la'anoes atzmam, that one uses the mezuzah as something which will be a protection. The very fact that he has this motive, it's a shalei lishma, and that itself in this case is worse than any regular shalei lishma, and he's a fool. We can't say such a thing. While for various reasons. No isif of them, in addition to the simple point, was es schwer zu sagen. It's very difficult to say, asilidem, was soll angerufen werden atypisch. That just because he's doing the mitzvah with this motive, he's referred to as a fool. Why is he a fool? The fact is that that's what a mezuzah is. A mezuzah is made for this protection. And the goal of the mezuzah is the fact that it provides protection. So even if you're going to tell me that, a person should not focus on that, though, that should not be the motive of the mitzvah, but if that is the motive of his mitzvah, could you call him a fool? After all, that is what the purpose of the mezuzah is. Why would he be called a fool? And to go so far to say that an individual that's focusing on this aspect of the mitzvah, which happens to actually be true, so you're going to say that he has no portion in the world to come? That's one point. Besides this, B'shas and Psak Din Mefurish in Rambam, there's a clear halacha in the Rambam as habari shekara psukim chulu. An individual, he's healthy, and he's reading psukim from the Torah, kedei shetagen chulu. And these psukim of the Torah, he reads them that they should be as a shield and a protection for him. Harei ze mutter, this is allowed. Das heißt, so the Rambam is clearly saying, one may use the words of Torah as a protection. And there's no issue of the fact that when you read Torah with this motive that you want it as a protection, that you're turning the Torah into some kind of an amulet for your own personal benefit. The Torah itself is a protection, and you can read the words of Torah for a protection. So over here as well, when a person has this kavanah shalei lishma, there's no way we can say that besides the actual motive, which is an issue, in this case by a mezuzah, you're utilizing the holy words of a mezuzah for your own personal protection. That's worse than just a plain shalei lishma. You can't utilize the words of Torah in such a way. But that's not true. The Rambam himself paskins regarding Torah, that one that learns Torah for the purpose of using it as a protection, that's totally allowed. The Torah is a source of protection. So it's the same thing over here. The issue of having this kavanah that the mezuzah is l'shem shmireh cannot be just the very fact that you're using it for shmirah. Nor, so rather, what is the issue over here with this individual? The Rambam Alein is masber. In the words of the Rambam, he explains himself the mitzvah that is meisiv. The Rambam adds and clarifies. Noch diverte kilu kamei shal nas atzman. After the Rambam says that he's treating this mezuzah like an amulet for his own benefit, he says kamei sha'ala aliba masachol, like it entered into the heart of those fools. That this is something that has benefit for you, just like any other things in the world, any other things that are nonsense or falsehood or in vain, that things in the world that you think that they give you protection, but they don't. So the Rambam adds these words that you're treating the mezuzah like other objects in the world that are part of havlei ha'olam, part of the things, the other objects in the world. What is the Rambam adding with this? Das, was sie schreiben herein in der Mezuzah, Shemes HaMalachim v'chulu. The issue over here is, when a person is writing into this mezuzah these names of malachim, of angels, Hagam, the mezuzah alein, is ashmira. Even though the mezuzah itself, the very mitzvah, is the source of the protection of the mezuzah. Is a bavais, what does this prove? As by zeh, is the mezuzah in ganzen nit kenin shel mitzvah. That the mezuzah that he has is not something that he's looking at as something unique and as something as a mitzvah. Weil was für an Ort hat es zum Meisev sein in der Mitzvah und Schmire shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What place is there to come and add your own personal things and names of angels? If this is actually a mitzvah and a protection that the Eibishter says is a protection, you have to add and help the Eibishter in this protection. So if he's adding this into the mezuzah, what does that mean? He doesn't even treat the mezuzah as a mitzvah b'chlal. Nor a kameya shel hanos atzman. He treats the mezuzah as just another amulet, like any other object in the world that can be used for your own benefit. So the mezuzah is another amulet that you can use also for your benefit. Ados sleep zaina nois. It's another object that can be used for your benefit. Was an havlei ha'olam. Like any other things in the world that can be for your benefit, and they're in vain. And not necessarily do they provide any benefit. And here you are using the mezuzah in the same way. You don't even view it as a mitzvah. That's the issue here. Und der Rebbe is a satipshus, and therefore we understand why the Rambam says that this is foolishness. For a mezuzah is a shmire, nor der Fall was das is a mitzvah und sie tut auf dem shmire. Why is a mezuzah a shmire? The fact that it is a mitzvah, and the mitzvah is the source of its shmire. In der Zeit, was they durch Meisev sein in the mezuzah, and at the very same time, this individual by adding into the mezuzah, naden sich, they're fooling themselves. Und meinen, as the shmire is not from the mitzvah. And they think that the source of the protection is not from the mitzvah of mezuzah, nor from a kameya shel hanos atzman. Instead, they're transforming into the mezuzah into some kind of an object that is stripped from it being a mitzvah, and it's just like another object that provides protection. As is adova, was mahai time is by zei recht, as is adova amahane bahavlei ha'olam. That he looks at the mezuzah as just like any other object in the world that can be part of foolish things in the world that you think provide your benefit. That's the foolishness over here. The fact that he's You have here something that's giving you protection. It's a mitzvah. Take the protection of the mitzvah. Instead, he strips it from the source of its protection, and he wants to get the protection from what? From this mezuzah, a mezuzah which is not a mitzvah, but rather like any other object in the world. How foolish. So that's the explanation why such an individual has no portion in the world to come. Similar to what it says, the halacha, the Rambam says, as divas eisen divrei Torah refuas guf, someone that turns Torah into something that's a healing for the body. That's how he treats Torah. In other words, he takes away the Torah from Torah. It's not, he doesn't see it as Torah, he just sees it like a medicine. Those are, they're part of people that just deny what Torah really is. While Torah is not refuas nefashis, because Torah really is Torah. It's holy and it's a healing for the soul. Torah is not just another utensil that you can utilize to heal yourself physically. Cases are not based on this. We understand that this is all not true. When one affixes a kosher mezuzah to his doorpost, on his garnet meisif in the mezuzah, and he doesn't add anything into the mezuzah. Nor beim kiyum a mitzvah hatte die machshave as tut es, weil will die schmire von the mitzvah. Rather, when he's fulfilling the mitzvah, he thinks about the fact that he wants the protection of this mitzvah. Is es l'chala yaiser in him gather from kiyum a mitzvah shalei lishma. The most that you can say about this is that if he's doing it with this motive, so he's doing a mitzvah with an ulterior motive. So then, it's not the ultimate fulfillment of the mitzvah in the purest way, but it's definitely a mitzvah which we even encourage people to do the mitzvah this way. And especially according to the distinction that the Rabbi explained before, if he's fulfilling the mitzvah not exclusively with this motive that I'm only doing it because of the shmirah that I get from it, his kavanah is, why am I doing this mitzvah? Because Hashem commanded me to do it. But what does the actual mitzvah itself consist of? Placing a mezuzah, which is a protection on the doorpost of your home. Is a demot mekayim the mitzvah b'shleimusa. So then you're actually fulfilling the mitzvah in its ultimate way of fulfilling a mitzvah, and there's nothing lacking in the mitzvah. So the conclusion over here is that we basically have three different ways a person can be doing the mitzvah of mezuzah. You have what the Rambam speaks about when one treats the mezuzah as this item that's mehavle ha'olam, and you don't even focus on the mitzvah aspect of the mezuzah. You just see it as anything else in the world, and then you're a tippish, you're a fool, that you're taking away the mitzvah of the mezuzah and you just want to get the protection without the mitzvah, while the shmirah comes from the mitzvah. Then you have the individual that does the mitzvah shalei lishma. So just like any mitzvah, there's a mitzvah shalei lishma, and this is something which is fully acceptable and even encouraged with people that cannot do the mitzvah for its sake of the mitzvah that Hashem said. So mezuzah is no different. Doing the mitzvah for the sake of the shmirah is fully acceptable. And then there's doing the mitzvah and understanding what the mitzvah consists of. The mitzvah consists of creating and providing a shmirah. And doing it with knowing that and having that in mind, there's absolutely nothing wrong. Not only that, that's the fullest fulfillment of the mitzvah. So now, based on this, as the shmirah was wird aufgetan durch mezuzah, that the protection that we get from the mezuzah is nit aschar or the sgula nesefes of the mitzvah. It's not some kind of reward or some kind of additional thing that comes out of this mitzvah. Nor das is me'inyan a mitzvah gufa. This is what the mitzvah itself is about. Wird verstandig a dvar pelle was me gefind bekeshet zu mitzvahs mezuzah. It'll explain something very unusual that we find regarding the mitzvah of mezuzah. The Mishnah in Masechta Kelim. So the Mishnah in Masechta Kelim, rechentois kame kelim was haben abeis kibbel. It mentions various different kinds of vessels that have a space to contain things inside. And therefore, because it has this place to contain, so that it meets the standard to be able to be susceptible to tumah. One of the examples the Mishnah says is Makel sheyesh boi beis kibul mezuzah, a cane that has a cavity in it where you can place a mezuzah inside. Very strange. Zogdar to Taisus Yomtiv. So the Taisus Yomtiv explains what exactly is this cane with this cavity inside. Ve'efsher, it's possible shehoyu anoshim bizman ha-mishnah, that people in the time of the Mishnah noisim mezuzah imam, they would carry a mezuzah with them. V'choshvu zeh lemitzvah u'l'shmira lehem. And they consider this to be as a mitzvah and as a protection for themselves. That was the custom in those times, and therefore the Mishnah speaks about this cane with this place to put a mezuzah inside. Was von dem, was man bringt up the Mitzias, von Makel sheyesh bei Chulu, tzlieb shmire, the fact that this is quoted in the Mishnah, this cane that could be used to place a mezuzah for a protection, and nobody there says anything about the fact that there's something wrong with this. Is mashma as otyan haga hatanart? So it seems like the Mishnah is saying that this is something which is acceptable. Ube'emes, and the truth is mashma u'nochmem muchach. It seems that it's actually even clear from Yerushalmi, from something that it says in the Yerushalmi, as the mezuzah gufe hatten sich zgulas hashmire, that the mezuzah has in it the ability to bring a person protection. Even when you're not yet fulfilling a mitzvah with this mezuzah. The very mezuzah itself, the object of mezuzah, when it's written properly, has in it a power for protection. As wird erzählt in Yerushalmi, the Yerushalmi relates the following: As Rabbeinu HaKadosh had geschickt a mezuzah to Artabain Anochri. Rabbeinu HaKadosh sent a mezuzah to Artabain, which was a non-Jew. Und hat ihm gesagt, and he said to him, as I shicked him, you shouldn't think I'm just selling you some kind of a parchment with words on it, but it's something that has actually value. Milo da'at damach lach v'hi minter lach. I'm sending you something which you're compared to it, meaning that this document has knowledge like you, it's powerful like a human being or even more, and this actually protects you. So das heißt, what do we see here clearly in the Yerushalmi? Agam as anochri is nitten geder from kiyum mitzvahs mezuzah, even though he's sending it to a non-Jew, and he of course is not at all included in the fulfillment of a mitzvah of mezuzah. Von deswegen is euch in dem Fall, is even in such a case, shayach der inyum from minterlach, was is da in mezuzah. It's possible that we can say to a guy, I'm sending this to you, and this mezuzah will be for you as a protection. And especially according to the continuation and the conclusion of the story, was wird gebracht in Sheiltis, brought in a different place in Sheiltis, as durch dem, was Artaban hat genommen die Mezuzah v'chulu, when he accepted this Mezuzah, hat sich gleich aufgetan die Schmire, it actually accomplished and it brought protection, and there was a certain shindalet that was bothering him, and it ran away. Is this so this whole entire concept of a mezuzah being used to place into a cane, or the fact that it's being sent to a non-Jew, seems to be a very astounding idea. In a mezuzah dafke, if this was the custom that they placed into this cane, a mezuzah, specifically a mezuzah, is this doch a haichoche, as matas genommen nit als stam a parsha von Teire, that this is being taken here, not just in any random parsha in the Teire which has some kedusha to it, and therefore we're using this, valach is b'chlal megen, Teire in general provides protection, not als shmira von a mezuzah. They specifically took a mezuzah to place into the cane. So the question is, wie is das shaykh the geder von shmire von a mezuzah? How is it possible here to say that there's any protection of this mezuzah when it's just a mezuzah, but it's not being hung on the doorpost as a mitzvah? The din is doch. The halacha is as tola b'makel psula. Even if someone would have a cane or a stick that's right near his doorpost, and he hangs it on this stick near the doorpost, it's puzzle. He didn't fulfill the mitzvah properly. And with the Gemara sagt, the Gemara is noch madgish, the Gemara even emphasizes more, sakane ve'im ba mitzvah. There's a danger here and there's no mitzvah. Kapirish Rashi, and Rashi explains, sakane min amazikin. He's in danger from anyone that can come and cause him harm. She'ena bayis mishtam rabba. The house will not be protected until he places it on the actual doorpost itself, as the halacha demands. So we see clearly that there's certain conditions of how a mezuzah has to be affixed to the doorpost in order to provide the protection to the home. The Gemara even though the Gemara does say, as shall base munvaz hamelech, in the house of Munvaz, the king, in the inns that they had, they would place a mezuzah there, even in places where it wasn't obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah, but they would place the mezuzah on a stick near the doorpost as a remembrance of the mitzvah of mezuzah. This idea of making a zecher for an actual mitzvah, we find in other scenarios. As when you can't fulfill the mitzvah, so you do something as a zecher. For example, as David is Zroya was menent Belel Pesach Zechet zum Korban Pesach. The Zroya that we take, we take a piece of the of a chicken, we take the zraya and we use it as a remembrance for the Korban Pesach that was brought in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Gefindt men aber nit. However, we never find as durach ha-zeicher zaman bakumen dem schara mitzvah cholo, that just by making a zeicher you get the benefit, the reward of the mitzvah. So even if we're going to say that here this is a zeicher, but this would not provide a shmirah. And the reason is why you do not get the reward of the mitzvah is understood. Hagam, das ist taka me'en und zeicher apitayre zu the mitzvah. It's somewhat like, and it's reminding you of the mitzvah. Is aber the schar verbunden mit dem kiyum mitzvah? The reward of a mitzvah is of course connected to the fulfillment of the actual mitzvah. So our question remains: what does this mean that a mezuzah itself is a source of protection? Al-Pianal is move on, but based on everything we learned before, we understand this. Wie bald the Shmiri Shayidei Mezuzah is verbunden mit dem Guf HaMezuzah. The protection that comes from a mezuzah is not merely a reward for fulfilling the mitzvah, but this is actually intrinsic to the actual object of the mezuzah itself. That's what the mezuzah is. It's an object of protection. The Mele is shayach, so it's possible as a me'en from the minyan hashmirah that somewhat of this protection is faran in the mezuzah alein, that it's there already. This power of protection in the actual mezuzah itself. Afilu edem is the mitmekayim mitzvahs mezuzah, even before you fulfill the actual mitzvah. Vibalt is geschrieben geworden the shem mezuzah v'chulu, once it's written it's properly for the mitzvah of mezuzah. Oder afilu by artapain, or even when it's written every word exactly precisely the way a mezuzah is written, and it's being written and it's being given to a non-Jew. So if the mezuzah that is written exactly the way a mezuzah is written, it has that power of shmirah that a mezuzah has. So the point there is, if a mezuzah would be a mezuzah, the fulfillment of a mitzvah that the Eibishter says, and the mezuzah itself has no power of shmirah in it. That's not what the mitzvah itself consists of. The shmirah that comes from the mezuzah is a schar. When do you get that schar? If you fulfill the mitzvah. If there's no fulfillment of the mitzvah, there's zero schar. But since the mitzvah itself consists of the shmirah, so of course the ultimate shmirah you have when you place it on the doorpost. And otherwise you don't have the full shmirah, and therefore the Gemara says it's a sakana. However, somewhat of the shmirah is there with the mezuzah itself, because that's intrinsic to what the very object of the mitzvah of mezuzah is all about. With this we could explain a very wondrous story that the Friediger Rebbe related actually about himself. When he was imprisoned, so the first time they interrogated him, they asked him, do you know where you are? The Friediger Rebbe was speaking with such chutzpah to the interrogators, so they do you know where you are? The Ruf hatte geämpft. So the Friediger Rebbe answered and said, of course I'm aware where I am. As I'm in such a place, it's exempt of placing a mezuzah on the doorpost here. There are places that are exempt of a mezuzah, like a barn for horses, or and a bathroom. So that's how he described the place that he's in. Move on. So this response of the Friediger Rebbe, it's not understood why he responded this way. Why does the Friediger Rebbe choose to express himself regarding this place in this negative way? As das is a makaim versus potter fun mezuzah, that this place is exempt from mezuzah. Even if the Friediger Rebbe wants to bring in something in connection to a mitzvah, but he doesn't have to bring it in this negative way. It would be more fitting to answer and bring in the Eibishter in a positive way. I'm in a place that here as well, there's the divine providence of Hashem right here. As das madgish, the zelendik prati amaise, fahren vorher und nach dem. Friediger Rebbe very much emphasizes this in the story that he relates about what happened in the details of his imprisonment, before his interrogation and after, that Hashem's glory fills every space in the world, something similar to this expression of the pasuk. This is something that the Friediger Rebbe emphasizes throughout. So why is this not the response that he gave the interrogators when they asked him whether he knows where he is? And especially as Admor hat gewollt weisen. Friediger Rebbe wanted to demonstrate to them, as he himself related more than once, as 40 mit that he's going to be very strong, und rechnet sich im Ganzen nicht mit sie and will not at all consider their existence. Bis as ki'ilu einam ucha'ayim ve'efes mamish, to the point that he considered them to be non-existent, nothing. They will not at all move him in any way. Wollte gepasst zu sagen Dafke in Yanamanal. So of course it would be more fitting to mention the fact this is the Eibishter's world, I'm in the presence of Hashem, and therefore all of you are totally non-significant and non-existent. So why is he mentioning about this mezuzah and in a negative manner? So the point, according to what we learned before here, we can say as follows. Kvei Kedushes Meire V'chami Admor hat euch dorten meiser gewollt haben die Schmire von Mezuzah. The Friedige Rebbe, even here in such a place and in prison, wanted to have the protection of a Mezuzah. Wie bald as es is nit gewen shaykh zum Mekayim sein the Mitzvah kepshuta. So since it's of course impossible to literally fulfill the Mitzvah of Mezuzah in such a place, hat the Rebbe getan, was hat gekent, zu machen as Zeiche zum Minyan Mezuzah. So therefore he did whatever is possible to make some kind of a mention to remember the Mitzvah of Mezuzah. Und noch mehr, even more than this, reden in Teires Mezuzah. Not just to stand mention the concept of a Mezuzah, but to say a halacha in Teire about the Mezuzah. Was durch dem wird nimshach am Me'en von Shmiras HaMezuzah. When you speak about Mezuzah, the very object of a Mezuzah is an object of protection. So speaking about the Torah of the Mezuzah brings somewhat of a protection. Und der Fall hat gesagt und mevare gewen ot die halacha. So therefore he spoke about and clarified the halacha of a Mezuzah. As the ort wo sich gefunden is Potem in Mezuzah. The place where he's in is exempt from a Mezuzah. Was damit hat sich aufgetan, die Scheiche zum Minyan Mezuzah in zwei in die Geneufen. And by mentioning this, he created a connection to the Mitzvah of Mezuzah where he is in a double way. Aleph number 1, durch ein Limud von Hilchas Mezuzah, just by learning a halacha and mentioning a halacha about Mezuzah. Is do psak din Chazal. So this is similar to what the Gemara tells us regarding a carbon. When one learns the halachas about a carbon, it's as if you actually brought the carbon. So here as well, ki'ilu et as dan mekayim mitzvahs mezuzah. By learning a halacha about mezuzah, it's as if he fulfills the mitzvah of mezuzah. And based on another point here is durch dem v'sarat mevare gewend the halacha. By him mentioning and clarifying this halacha as their bias, that this house here, this room here, and is begeder uchsaftom al mezuzahs beisecha, it does fall into the category of being a room and a place, which is a bias that usually is what qualifies for the mitzvah. But over here, in this case, is potter mi mezuzah. It's still, nevertheless, exempt from placing a mezuzah on it. So hat es peil given as shayche, so this creates a connection. Nit nor mit teires mezuzah, not only with the halacha of the Torah that he said of the mezuzah, nor oich mit mitzvahs mezuzah. He's creating a connection to this bias, to this place, to the actual mitzvah mezuzah. As shayche is shlilis. There's a connection to this place in a negative sense. There, bias is potter mi mezuzah. This house happens to be potter. On one hand, it is a house that's related to the mitzvah, that falls under the category of the qualification of beisecha for the mitzvah, but this place happens to be such a kind of house which is actually potter. So there is a connection to this house, but in a negative sense. Or in other words, besignen achiktzas, to put it in a bit of a different way, the shayches von a bias to a mezuzah can sein of zwei fanem. The connection of a house, of a room, to a mezuzah could be in one of two ways. Aleph, a bias was mechoyev mezuzah, a house which is actually obligated in the mitzvah, is the shayches and a neifim chiyuvi. So that's a connection in the positive sense that you're actually obligated. Durch kivei zayin a mezuzah al pesach habayis, when you actually go and affix the mezuzah to the doorpost. Beis, a bias was potem mezuzah. You have a house, it's also a house. When it says in the Torah beisecha, it's also included in that pasuk. And it's potter of mezuzah. It's the shayches and a neifim shlili. So over here, the connection to the mitzvah of mezuzah will be in the negative. Then folgt ois tziviyat Torah. You'll come in and analyze or examine this doorpost and examine this house to see, is it chayiv mezuzah? Is it not chayiv mezuzah? And you're going to fulfill and follow what the Torah says, and you don't affix the mezuzah to this door. But the very fact that this is a house, and you come and examine if yes or no, and then you say, no, it's not, that itself is fulfilling a mitzvah of mezuzah, so to speak, in the negative sense, in relation to this house as well. So this is the reason why the Friedige Rebbe was beiche gewend zu sagen, as gefindt sich in a bayis, was is potter from mezuzah, that he's in a house, he's in a place which is a bayis, which is related to the obligation of mezuzah, and it's potter of this mezuzah. Das hat mamshich given an inyan shel shmire from mezuzah, because this brought a connection to the mitzvah of mezuzah. And what is the very mitzvah of mezuzah? Shmire. It's not stam a side reward of the mitzvah, but that's actually what the mitzvah itself consists of. So therefore, by connecting this place to the mezuzah, even in a way, in the negative, which is a way of fulfilling the mitzvah by not placing the mezuzah, you're connecting this place to what the mezuzah is, which is the shmire of the mezuzah. Von dem allem ist verstandig, from all of this we understand. Der Geidel has chus, was is da, in der Stadlus, in Mitzvah Mezuzah, obefrat b'yameinu eila. The tremendous merit that there is in the effort in the Mitzvah Mezuzah, which the Rebbe announced in those years, the campaign to see to every single Jewish home should have a Mezuzah, and especially in these days. Yidin zene doch gekifsa achas ben ayin ze'evim. The Medrash compares Klal Yisrael to one lamb living amongst 70 wolves. V'zeh hilf is there, and the only way Yidden could be protected and saved is by this one shepherd that protects it and guards it and saves it. Especially after the last occurrences, and the Rebbe is referring to in that time when there were a group of Yidden that were killed in Eretz Yisrael in the mid-70s, in Tafshin Lamed Dalet. In Velache Mahad Gizem B'Muchish, and then they went and they looked at the mezuzahs of those people that were killed, God forbid, Rachman al-Tzan. So you saw clearly as es hat gefällt in the bottom from the Gelittenet that those people in their homes, the ones that unfortunately were killed in Kiyum Mitzvahs Mezuzah. The mezuzahs that they had in their homes were not kosher mezuzahs. Was the shame geschrieben in an Eufen as Mezuzah gesehen. When the mezuzah is showing zusammengewickelt is Shin Daled Yud. The name of the Eibusher that's written on a mezuzah and has to be exposed and seen even after you roll up the mezuzah is the name of Shin Daled Yud, which is Rosh Tevis Shomer Dalsas Yisrael, the guardian of the doors of the Yidden. Is there Shem Shmirasai nit given by Zay. So those people, they had a mezuzah, but it was missing this Shin Daled Yud, and therefore didn't have the protection of the mezuzah. So this was something that was clearly seen regarding those that unfortunately were killed at that time. Dav Zayin, so now we understand that there should be Hishtadlus Hachi Gedaila, the greatest effort possible, as Yede Yiddische Hoys, every Jewish home zal haben a mezuzah if alle tiren, should have a mezuzah on all doors, ha-mechuyavim b'mezuzah that are obligated in the mitzvah of mezuzah. Und sie soll sein angeklappt kol chasa, and also to be sure that it's affixed to the doorpost on the right side, which is different halachas, how to determine exactly which side you place the mezuzah on. Und die Stadlos darf sein, sei bei Anoshim, this effort should be both with men, and sei bei Noshim, and with women as well. They're obligated in this mitzvah exactly like men. Befrat, wie the Gemara is masbeh, the Gemara itself explains this. Gavri boya chaya, nosha loy boya chaya. The Gemara there considers that maybe we should say that women are potter from mezuzah. The Gemara says that can't be. Men need life and women don't need life. If the pasuk says that by the mitzvah of mezuzah, yir b'yumechem, you'll have long life, of course this is a mitzvah for women as well. V'oid, an additional point, how the mitzvah of mezuzah is actually uniquely connected to a woman. Zayin di akeres habayis, being that the woman is the mainstay of the home, likt auf ihr a spezielle Pflicht zu bewahren in Yoni habayis. So of course there's a special obligation, and the job of the woman is to see that all things in the house should be proper and in place. Including also the fact that the mezuzah has the protection that it needs. Und durch dem wird a Shmira auf dem Bayis, and through the mitzvah of mezuzah, this protects everything in the home, und auf alles, was gefindt sich im Bayis, and everything that's found in the home. Und noch mehr, actually even more so, wie steht in the Zohar, as it says clearly in the Zohar, die Shmira is an Anöfen von Havaya Yishmeit Seischa Uvayecha Meyata Vadelam, that Hashem protects when you go out, and when you come back home forever, afila reis geindik from Bayis, even when you leave your home. Und wie bald, as Kol Yisrael, Arevim Zebazeh, and since all Yidden are guarantors for one for another to fulfill a mitzvah, und all Yidden zenen akoyma achas, all Yidden are considered to be like one big body, making up one unit. Ist verstandig, so it's understood, dass durch der Reisafa von Kiyum Mitzvahs Mezuzah von jeder einzigen Cheder am Mechuyev Mezuzah. So through adding in the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Mezuzah of just one single room or every single room, wird nicht teisef euch in der Schmire von der ganzen Keime von Kol Yisrael. This adds to the protection to all Klal Yisrael that it make up one body. For jeder Yid. So it adds to the protection of every single Yid. Anoshim, Noshim, Vitaf, men, women, and children. B'chol makim shehu, in any location where they are in the world. B'loshin HaKasev, again to quote the pasuk that Isaiah brings regarding Mezuzah, Havaye yishmet seischa uvayecha me'ato v'yadaylam. That Hashem should protect you when you come in, you go out, now and forever.